Hey folks, it is October the 21st, and we are going over chapter 55 today. We're going to skip a lot of the chapters within this section, and on Monday we're going to come back and talk about the Crusades. I'm going to have a primary source reading for you on Friday, and so we're not going to have a lecture on Friday, so no video. All right, so following terms are up on the board. We have scriptures. That means like, what did the medieval church, what was its view on scriptures? So what are sacraments? The 7 sacraments. What are relics? What's purgatory? All of these things are going to be important, not just to understand how people's beliefs and thoughts in late antiquity and medieval times, and even a lot of people today. But also, these things are going to be very influential when we talk about the Crusades, because we're going to have battles in order to free up relics. Like, that's going to be a big one. There's going to be forgiveness to have people immune from purgatory, in a sense. So there's going to be there's going to be a big. I mean, it's the Crusades. It's a religious war. A lot of religious elements to it. So, all right. Huh? Yeah, sure. When we get there, I'll let you do it.
We can start from the bottom.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. Or we could skip around. We can do that. All right, so here, of course, one thing about the Catholic Church is they have a priesthood. Of course, today, not a lot of different denominations have priesthoods. They have pastors who fulfill some of the roles that a priest did back then, but of course, not all of them. You see they have different garb, and the garb has different colors based on what we call a liturgical season, because the church went by what we call a lunar calendar that was based off the old Jewish calendar. And of course, it was sprinkled in with many Christian holidays and things like that. And so we see this manner of dress was based on ancient Roman priest dress, including the scapula they wear here and here, the mitre that bishops and popes and people like that wore. Of course, the staff is supposed to signify that they are shepherds of the community. They often, they were some of the few people who had access to scriptures, though not all priests did, because the books were so expensive. Even a lot of the churches didn't have Bibles back then, because it could take hundreds of sheep to make enough vellum in order to make a Bible. And that was a massive fortune back then. So even Bibles were super expensive before the printing press. Of course, their chief role was to administer the sacraments, especially the one of the Eucharist, which was kind of like, it signified the Last Supper, but it also had to believe that they truly were consuming the body and blood of Christ, not just in a symbolic way, but also in like a transubstantial state, kind of like it's like literal, but it's not something you can like tell with your senses at the same time. So complicated, to say the least. Of course, here's a stained glass signifying the 7 sacraments. You have baptism, you had reconciliation and confession, because, well, baptism was to cleanse what ancient church Christian Augustine called original sin that was essentially inherited from Adam and Eve. Priests were seen as the people who could channel the forgiveness of Christ because they based it off of Jesus telling Peter that they had the power to forgive sins, and they said that they inherited that. Of course, confirmation is when you take a vow that you're going to be part of the church. Here they are celebrating the Eucharist, or getting the bread and the wine. You see, this is to be the priesthood, or this is the priesthood, which like not everybody could participate in all of them, because like the medieval church is going to ban marriage from priests, so you had to pick one or the other. Of course, you didn't have to get married, but it's just one of those things. You also had extreme unction. That's where they like anoint the sick, to give them, it was to call on God's blessings for sick people, make them feel better, but also to ask for help in healing, but also forgiveness of sins before they died. So that's it. So yeah, this is the same one, really. All right, so we'll talk about this more later, but the papacy is going to get extremely powerful. We're going to have times when you're going to have kings literally begging the Pope for forgiveness, because I think this is Frederick II, if I remember right. I could be wrong, like a German king. He made the Pope mad, and so the Pope excommunicated his whole kingdom. So there on Christmas, in the middle of the snow, he goes up to Rome, and dressed as a beggar, he's out there with his liege lords, like begging at the door of the Pope to let them in and forgive them, because his entire people are threatening to kill him. Like nobody could imagine trying to overthrow a king in medieval times. It was something unheard of, unless you excommunicated your whole kingdom and everybody was scared of going to hell. Then they got a little mad at you. Let's see, I'll talk about that later. That's Francis. So yeah, okay, not to have any images today. So remember, a lot of these things are still around in churches today, especially you'll see similar things in Eastern Orthodoxy in Greece and Russia, and of course the churches of North Africa, like Egypt, Syria, stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of like the older churches still, in many ways, practice Christianity in this manner, and of course the Catholic Church. Of course, there's some other Eastern churches as well that do this. But when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, they're going to totally do away with almost all of this stuff, and one of them is going to be purgatory. That's one of the things that's pretty much only going to stick around in the Catholic Church. I'm not sure if Orthodox folks believe in it or not. So, Andrew, what's purgatory? Like, if you read, are y'all reading Dante?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay.
Reading
Are y'all going to read the whole Divine Comedy, or just? Okay. Yeah. So when he wrote the Divine Comedy, it had three parts. It had the Inferno, where he goes to hell. Then it has Purgatorio, where he goes to purgatory, and that's the third part, Paradiso, where he goes to heaven. And so, like, if you read all of Dante, he talks about this. So, what on earth was purgatory, or is, or?
Purgatory is a place or state of suffering inhabited by the souls of sinners who are experiencing their sins before they expect.
Yeah. So, a state of being for souls who died with sin.
So they didn't just go straight to hell, they had to go to purgatory?
It depends. Well, it gets a little more complicated than that. I'll explain the same. They died with sin, but not destined for hell. So,
Isn't purgatory more like a waiting room to see like what your destination is?
kind of, but even the Catholic Church isn't entirely sure what they think purgatory is. So it's like this, right? So,
Some people believe it's the realm of monsters.
well, here's the thing. So, in Catholic Church, they teach that there's two kinds of sins. You got called venial sins, right? It's like the little sins, like little white lies, not being charitable and stuff like that. And then you've got what's called the mortal sins, the deadly ones, right? Like murder and adultery and, like really bad things. So in the medieval church, they believe if you've died with one of those horrible sins on you, yeah, you're going most likely to hell. But even they weren't sure about that. But heaven was not a place that's fit for imperfect souls even with little sins. So purgatory is a place it essentially means purification, right? So where people are purified until they're worthy of like the cleanliness and the goodness and all that stuff of heaven. So yeah, so this, when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, like Martin Luther, this is going to be one of the things Martin Luther is going to fix on, because he's going to get mad about how the church is going to sell indulgences to get people out of this place. And that's one of the things he's going to be like, hey, you're making money off of this. So I'll get to that later. So now we got that, but this also going to make sense for the Crusades, because the Pope's going to be like, hey, I'm going to give you a get out of free pass if you go die in the Crusades. So, yeah, so it's going to motivate some warriors. All right, so scriptures. What did the church back then say about scriptures? Who did they say had the interpretation rights?
The church.
Church. Yeah. So,
You can't understand this, so we're gonna tell it to you.
and to be a little fair, almost like 99% of the population will say, whatever, you know. All right, so see, so it said the church had authority to interpret, I'm going to spell it. Is that how you spell interpret?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Scriptures. So, yeah, here's the thing. What's funny is that after the printing press is invented, you're going to have, the Bible is going to be like the most printed book. People are going to read it left and right. The thing is, though, is that literacy starts to grow, and you're going to start having the Inquisition. Most Inquisitions weren't like the Spanish one where they're like killing a bunch of people. But they're going to, but the cool thing about the Inquisition is they wrote down what happened in the court proceedings. Let's see what was going on. I have a book here somewhere about an Italian guy who was in the Inquisition like multiple times, because he studied scriptures, but he came up with really weird ideas, and he would go tell his other village members about his ideas. And somehow, out of reading scriptures, he got the idea that the world was made of cheese, and that there was giant worms underground, and all this other weird stuff. So that really scared a lot of church officials. So
Must have been on something.
maybe he ate some moldy bread, but I don't know. But yeah, like so yeah. The thing is, they didn't want people misreading scriptures because they were afraid that people would go to hell. They really were. So they were afraid of like heresy and stuff like that. They thought there was a real danger, and that's one of the reasons why when we get to the religious wars, it's going to be so heated, because you're going to have like Lutherans and Catholics fighting because they both think they're trying to prevent one another from going to eternal hell. And that's a lot more than just fighting for your life. It's fighting for your eternity. So, sacrament. So what's a sacrament?
Acts in like which a faithful Christian must participate, because like they don't want to be away from God. So
Yeah. Acts of faith within the church structure, really. It's like you could do things that are like acts of faith, like they could do like charity and stuff, right? Or help out old people. And they could do it because they're like, hey, I want to do this because I love Jesus. So that would be an act of faith. But yeah, this is an act of faith like within the church. Only people who are in the church can do these things. By the church, we're talking about the Catholic Church. It's like really the only one around there. So yeah, like, and it goes to like the 7, because like these things are going to change a little bit later, and the Catholic Church didn't start with all of these. Like there were some of them, like the anointing of the sick, they didn't do throughout most of Europe for a long time, because oils, like olive oil and stuff, was only in the Mediterranean. You couldn't get that stuff in England. I mean, they couldn't trade or ship that kind of thing in the Middle Ages. They didn't have any real way to get it. So they just kind of didn't do that one. All right. Now, you want to do relics?
Yeah.
Okay, what's a relic?
An artifact that was saved from early, like the Golden Age.
Okay, an artifact. Yeah. But instead of golden age, let's think of a kind of person. From what kind of person?
Like Christ.
Like Christ. Yeah, it could be from Christ or who else?
Popes or like saints.
Yeah, or the
There's
saints.
bones, and there's stuffs and clothing.
Yeah, so it says, yeah, bones, clothing, could be whole bodies.
Or the tomb that they buried in.
Yeah, the tomb. So, and stuff. So, like, that's one of those things, like to American Christians, like, what? So, like, because, like, in medieval churches, when you founded a church, you were supposed to have a relic. That's one of the reasons why Catholic churches and even Orthodox churches are usually named after somebody, like a saint. And a saint is somebody who's supposed to die and go to heaven, and they're in constant prayer for the world, right? So that's their idea there. That's why they would venerate the saints. They would ask the saints for help. So, whenever they found a church, they would have like a little bone from somebody. Could have been like somebody from the Bible, like Andrew, not you, but another Andrew, or a little bit of their clothing or something like that, because it was supposed to signify that connection with that holy person. Yeah.
I give you a fun fact.
Give me a fun fact.
Did you know that the upside down cross is not a symbol of satanic?
Symbol of Peter.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause he was-
being an apostle.
Yeah, he was crucified upside down.
Some people do use it as a symbol of being
If you want
Yeah, it's
the
'cause they don't
actual
know
thing,
better.
you want this. This is called the Leviathan cross,
Yeah, that's
which is a
That's
lot
right.
more easier and not very
No,
many
we
people
don't know what that is. Yes.
That is
The Catholic Church just have one on, have one in it. Have not been open. It's like
okay?
Yeah, it's that's the thing. When we talk about the Reformation, they're going to talk about, like, that's going to be one of the things, like Calvin and Luther are going to be like, hey, this relic thing got going on is like really out of control, and so the Catholic Church is going to send out investigations. They're going to like, hey, we got to go check out these holy relic things. We got to make sure that they're legitimate. And yeah, a lot of them, even the church, was like, hey, this isn't real. And supposedly, they said they found enough wood from the true cross to make a whole building. I was like,
No, I think it was the Trailing Iron Boat.
yeah, it's something like that. It's like something crazy. It's like, it's because what you had is you had a lot of people who were going around, and it's just something medieval kings would go bankrupt doing this, relic collecting, right? And so you'd have these traveling salesmen go around and be like, hey, I've got a body part of a saint. You want to give me some money for it? And so, and they would do this. And so, yeah, they would pay like a lot of money. And so you would have kings like give up fortunes for these things. And then later on, when a lot of these kings and queens move away from Catholicism, instead they're going to give up fortunes into alchemy. They're like, hey, we can make an elixir for eternal youth. Really? Okay, yeah. Or like the Philosopher's Stone, or transmutation. And so they'll give up massive amounts of wealth. In fact, that's going to be why Queen Elizabeth is going to fund a lot of her exploration of North America, is because an astrologer named John Dee is going to tell her that there's ingredients for the Philosopher's Stone there and all this stuff. And so she's going to like dump all this money in exploration there.
Were there?
No, they found tobacco. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. All right. Yeah. And we got this thing. We got the list of the 7 sacraments. So it goes from birth to death, so from cradle to grave. So they believed in these things, and these things were kind of like the focus of much of their lives, along with religious holidays and stuff like that. So what was the first one that the babies would get? Yeah, baptism. So they got baptism. What's another one?
Confirmation.
Confirmation. That's when they join the church. So oddly enough, you could be baptized, but you could also be not inside the church at the same time. You had to do both of these before you start getting the other things. So it's still like that today. So what's another one?
Matrimony.
Yep. So marriage. For a while, the priest can do that. Then eventually, really what happens is it gets too expensive because the locals had to pay for the care of the priest. But the priest had like a wife and like a dozen kids. They had to pay to take care of them too, so people couldn't do that very long, especially medieval peasants. What's another one? Penance, yeah. So like it's kind of funny because they believe that people could get forgiveness of their sins from God directly, but they also believed it was just safer to go through the church to do it like that. So what's another one? Yeah, the Eucharist. So that's the Last Supper, like we were talking about earlier. What's another one?
Holy Order.
Yeah, so orders. Yeah, holy orders. So that's if you become a monk or a nun or a priest, or there's also some lesser ones, like we'll talk about a little bit tomorrow. What's one more?
Extreme.
Unction. Yeah, extreme unction. So yeah, that's like final.
The oil, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but there's nothing people call it last rites. Extreme unction. So yeah, so this is why excommunication was so important to people. Like if you got excommunicated, you weren't allowed to do these things. And it wasn't a guarantee that you couldn't get to heaven, but all of these things were supposed to act as a safety net to make sure you didn't go to hell. So that's why you would have kings like go beg the Pope to get back in the church and stuff like that. So, and this is why you're going to see people are going to be so fervent in the Crusades as well. But hey, we're going to go ahead and end there, kids. We're going to come back and I think it's 59. I'll have to go back and check. But it's going to do with friars. Because the friars are going to be important because the Franciscans and the Dominicans we're going to talk about have to do a big deal with American exploration, especially for Central and South America and Texas. All right. Talk to you later, kids. That's why we have all those missions like the Alamo and